Greetings, Piper people. I hope you're doing well and looking forward to learning about bias. That's what this video is going to be about. I've got a PowerPoint in this module and a PDF on this bias presentation, but this video is going to go over and give you that voiceover on everything because doing it on a PowerPoint and just looking at it isn't just going to be enough. So I want to be able to explain how this stuff works. In this video, we'll talk about and explain what bias is, how it functions, how we all have bias. And this is just that general foundation of how it works in research and a lot of how to avoid it. Later on, we'll go into the bias in social media, how social media actually changes our viewpoint, our perspective, especially when it comes to politics, how it can make us even change our actions, even in voting, which is really interesting. This is all going to lead into our bias analysis project as we go into where we're headed with that paper. It's going to be our informative paper and what we're doing with it. So ultimately, we're going to end up finding 3 articles that are going to be about the same topic. And we're going to analyze those for bias and then inform our readers about what is happening in that topic from those 3 different perspectives. So in order to do all that, we've got to start from, like set the foundation. So let me get this PowerPoint up, and I'm working with 2 screens here, so it's going to be like a little bit weird, but think you're going to find this stuff interesting. So with this bias, we're going to get that foundation about what you need to know, how it works. Everyone has bias. We usually like to call it preferences, right? It might be preference like what kind of food we like, how we kind of prefer certain information over others, who we're attracted to, all of these kind of things, different ideologies, our politics, all of this kind of stuff, that stuff matters, right? Um, we have, in many respects, those preconceived ideas about certain, kind of assumptions. We might think about different areas of the world to travel in or anything like that. But when it comes to research, which is what we're really talking about here, how do we tell if that researcher or researchers have bias in that article? How do we tell if we can use that research in our own research, in our own writing? So, what do we do when we're finding sources? And is it valid? Is it credible? And where do we find whether or not a source has crossed the line? Because that can come into some danger areas. I've had students who have used research that has been completely biased and it has skewed their results. I have had students, for example, in a previous institution who have failed their own research projects and not been able to graduate because they have not followed appropriate research methods, because their pre-assumptions, their preconceived notions of their research has not been appropriate. They have been so biased that they didn't do the research correctly. We've had in past areas of say medical research, for instance, where bias has changed, literally changed the world and made people not choose certain or made certain choices for their children. If you look up Andrew Wakefield, Dr. Andrew Wakefield, for instance, you'll see that his research has changed the world and changed the way people feel about vaccines. And you might find why he is no longer allowed to practice medicine. So bias can matter and can have drastic consequences depending on how it is used. For us, we're not necessarily in comp to going to change the world yet, but bias has direct impact in a lot of ways. So let's talk about it a little bit further. Now, how do we determine bias and how does that actually work? So one way to do it is to read the author's biography. So this is what else has this author or authors, group of authors actually written. Experts tend to write about the same kind of topics. So if a expert is writing about environmental science about one article, then more than likely they'll be writing about environmental science topics in subsequent articles. So look to see what they're writing about and see what else they're having to say about it. More than likely, you're going to see kind of the same topic, the same kind of attitudes, the same kind of perspective in their work. You look at these citations and references, the same types of sources are often used. And if the author is using or authors are using biased sources from kind of like one side, then that's a way to tell, what kind of sources are they referencing? Are they using biased sources or are they using kind of opposing viewpoints or how are they actually working? You also look at the source itself. How is it being written? Look at the language. Look at how well it's written. Are they using language that is ignoring information? Are they emphasizing certain information over other information? Maybe they're just dismissing it. Maybe they've just deleted a whole bunch of stuff. And that means you got to look at the claims that are made and compare that information to other sources because that is going to be really important too. So you're not just comparing like to like, as in, say, Joe Smith's work to Joe Smith's work. You're looking at Joe Smith and Sarah Sutherland and a whole bunch of other different sources about the topic or surrounding that topic. You're comparing and analyzing what a lot of different people say about the topic. And that tells you whether or not these sources are valid and are they credible? Are they biased? Look at how that information is portrayed. And if you can tell whether or not there's bias, that gives you a sense of not just the validity, but how to use it if you can. If you look at the source and you see that there's bias, you might be able to balance it with something else on the other side. So it kind of just depends. If you can balance that source, then you've got something to compare to, and that is a conversation to be had in your research. So we'll talk about that as we move further. So that leads us into a conversation about facts and opinions. What does that mean and how does that work? So a fact is going to be a statement that we can verify, not necessarily proven to be true or false, but something that can be verified. Sometimes we might see something as true or false as well. So we got to go a little bit further. We got to see where the evidence lies. So here's an example. More than 1 million teens become pregnant every year. So say take the United States. This is something that we can actually look up, right? I mean, quick Google search and just see the numbers. Yes, more than 1 million teens become pregnant every year. That's easy to find out, and we can verify that as a fact. The costs of medical care increase every year. Yeah. So we're not saying that particular medical care costs, or we're not like delineating specific types or, those kind of things. We're just saying the general cost of medical care. Yeah, that's kind of a trend that's been happening, right? We can look that up too. So yes, we can say that as a fact. Now, I wouldn't in my paper just leave it like that, but as say like a topic sentence this could work, and then continue to back that up with further evidence. You don't want to just state that and leave it there, of course. But if you back it up with more evidence and further discussion, then you have some conversation that can matter, and you can verify it as a fact. Now, on the other side, here we have opinions, and this is a statement that more, well, it's in our fields, right? This is what I think, this is what I feel, in my opinion. It's an attitude or a belief or an ideology. It's not necessarily true or false. It's an opinion. Here's the thing about opinions, and I'm not going to be facetious here, but in research, an opinion doesn't matter so much. In academics, people don't really care what you think or what you believe. We care about what's true, what's real. So we like facts more than anything. Even if we have pretty little letters behind our name, like, the associates, the bachelors, the masters, the PhDs, the MFAs, all of these things, we really can't say stuff by ourselves without backing it up. This is why many medical doctors have patients who say, I would like a second opinion, because you don't want to just say, I need a heart transplant, and then not ask for a second opinion. You're just going to tear my heart out and pop another one in, and I'm just going to call it good. I'd kind of like to get another expert just to say, is that really what needs to happen? And the doctors are going to say, well, okay, here's another person. She knows what I'm talking about. And she say the same thing. Well, okay, well, how does this work? And it's more of a confidence and everything. They might be an expert in their field, but getting that second opinion allows us to confirm those things. It's okay, right? This is what we do. But in a lot of research, an opinion needs a little bit more. So let's look at some examples. Now, here's one. It says government interference in our private lives should be halted immediately. Before I go further, can you see the grammar issue in this sentence? Anybody? So if you can find it, and if you can send me the grammar correction in this sentence before January 31st, just email it to me, then I'll give you, say, 5 bonus points. But you got to tell me exactly where the grammar correction is. Okay, so let's look at where the opinion is in this sentence. So government interference in our private lives should be halted immediately. Now, a lot of students will think should be halted. Okay, well, I can kind of see that because it has like a direction in there. That could work. Maybe private lives. Well, it's a description. We can all have private lives, right? The real the real opinion part has to do with the idea that government interferes in our private lives, that there's government interference there. That's the real opinion. So government interference in our private lives, not that it should be halted, yes, but that it's interfering. So that's the main thrust of the sentence, and it should be halted immediately. So the opinion is that interference needs to be halted, not that we have a government, the interference. Another one is by the year 2030, most Americans will not be able to afford routine health care. Now we know that medical costs are rising every year. Can we really for sure say that most Americans will not be able to afford routine health care? I don't know. So one way to talk about opinions might be, how do you know? Ask yourself or ask of the text, how do you know for sure? Like, for real, for real? Where's the evidence? So in the text, they've got to back it up. Remember, they can't just say it by themselves. Where's the evidence, the proof? If they don't have any, it's just an opinion. Did they back it up at all? Do they have anything at all, or is it just an opinion? And does the opinion matter? Do they have any expertise, any credentials that say that their opinion, that they know for sure? Or are they just saying words that are empty? Now, there's a lot of people in the United States that can't afford medical care. We know this. But there's a lot of people who can. We'd have to look. So back to facts. Once a fact is verified, so like you can see that information in multiple sources, say 3 or 4 more sources, then it's pretty reliable. If you can see that information in like across the board, then you can establish that as common knowledge. You don't want to say everyone knows 9 times out of 10, those kind of things. Those are blanket statements. We want to refrain from that stuff. But if you can establish that something is common knowledge, that's not necessarily something that we would want to say in a research paper at this level, like saying the sky is blue. Okay, except it's really not. But the sky looks blue on like a regular summer day, the sky looks blue. That's not really something that we would necessarily talk about. After all, you wouldn't go into a symposium or a conference of biologists and give them the process of photosynthesis. They already know it. That would be common knowledge, right? They would laugh you out of the conference. So if it's common knowledge, we don't need to talk about it. So how do we know if a source is reputable? That's going to be something that we talk about. That's a question to keep in mind. So let's look at opinions. They're not always reliable. We got to evaluate that stuff very carefully. So we'll talk about some caution signs. Sometimes we'll see some kind of suggestions in the sentences. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but when we say this suggests, in my view, in my opinion, I think, I feel, those kind of things. Now we might see research suggests. Well, if we have something that backs up those opinions, researchers suggest, and then we have proof, we've got the evidence of that. But if we just say, I think, honey, ain't nobody care what you think. You see the difference? So let's look at what's supported and what's unsupported opinions, because that really matters, right? So everyone knows the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. We see like the wage gaps. We see the major gaps between the uber rich, like the 1%. It's even 0.1% now, like the billionaires, and then the uber poor. We see that. So everyone knows. How do you know? How can you prove that everyone knows? Everyone in the world knows this? We can't say that. That's a blanket statement. It's like saying 9 times out of 10. My husband, like, he'll say that sometimes. And it's just a euphemism, right? It's just like, we're just saying that because everybody knows this stuff. It's common knowledge. My inner 12-year-old, not that I have like a multiple personality, but that's just kind of like my inner thoughts, right? I always say my inner 12-year-old. My inner thoughts will say, how do you know? Have you counted this? And I always want to ask, but I wouldn't because I'm too nice for that. But I always want to ask, like, have you actually counted the 9 times out of 10? I'm just saying. Everyone knows. Is that supported or unsupported, right? I mean, obviously it's unsupported. You can't count that because there's like over 8 billion people in the world. You can't say everyone knows. Here's another example, though. In the early 1970s, the top 1% of earners in the United States earned only about 10% of the total US income. By 2010, the top 1% earned a whopping 23.5%. Clearly, the rich are getting richer. And who knows what the percent would be today, right? We could look that up, though. So here's some statistics. Here's some evidence that when you say, how do you know? Now we do know. So here's some extra information. Obviously, clearly, the rich are getting richer. It's supported opinion. So if we're giving the evidence, this opinion has some backup. It's got some extra stuff to it. It has some more emphasis. Somebody knows what they're talking about, right? Now, what about the sources? How do we see this happening? This supported, unsupported, where's the bias? How's that work? So when we see a source taking a side without recognizing opposing viewpoints, that's definite bias, where they're not like it's like a one-sided argument. It's all my side matters, and I'm the best. Sometimes this might be outright direct, like, hello, look at me, I'm the best. Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle than that. It's going to be concealed, where it's kind of understated. So we'll kind of look at that. So you might look at whether or not the writer is acting as a reporter. Are they giving you information that is just providing information? Here you go. You decide what to do with it. They're just reporting information. So that's a little bit less biased, right? You, as an audience, get to decide what to do with it. That's different. That's less biased. How strongly does the author feel about the information provided? Is there kind of a negative or a positive feel to it or connotation to it? So look at the language, the descriptive language especially. Is there kind of a tone given? Or are they just reporting stuff? If you kind of have a feel to it in the opinions given. What is the intent of the writer? So is the purpose behind the information? And this goes from the thesis statement on down. So what is the purpose, the intent of the writing itself? You got to look behind that. So that description, look at how the author or a group of authors describe things. Is there that connotation? So the difference between the connotation and denotation of language. Think back to Comp 1. The denotation of a word is like the dictionary meaning, of course. The connotation is the underlying meaning. And we know that words have both meanings, and they're varied. So kind of look at multiple meanings here, because the rhetoric could be a lot of different things. And that's where sometimes that concealed meaning can really take effect. How emotional is that author? Especially, like in think like clickbait in social media posts, where maybe the title or the video or even just the color scheme is going to be something where, oh, this is going to be really saucy. I got to click on this. And it ends up being nothing. Does that drive you crazy? So is it something that's going to be really emotionally involved? Is it something that is supposed to be, is it going to get you angry? Is it going to be something that maybe a call to action where you are called to do something about it. That could be pretty emotional. Are you supposed to feel? I mean, think like those poor puppy commercials. Of course you want to do something, it any kind of holidays or anything, you're supposed to, I don't know, like give them all your money and go get 12 puppies, right? Like that's the purpose of it. So think about the emotion there. Here's the big kicker. Does the author provide opposing viewpoints in the argument? That's the big one. So, is there other ideas presented in the writing? If not, you definitely have bias. So, check those sources and see what's going on. So, what's a reputable source anyway? Look at the credibility and the accuracy of the researcher and the information presented. Look at how relevant and up to date the topic is. Is it something that people are talking about now, especially on the research, or is it completely out of date? So one of the ways that we can do that now is looking at our online databases. So one of our best ones, especially if you're looking at like current events, is our Infobase. So a lot of our instructors are using this right now. It is super cool. So if you're looking for current events, check out Infobase. It's one of the best. Super neat stuff. You can also get historical stuff on it too. A lot of really cool stuff. So look at the credentials, the expertise of the author. Exactly what do they have? This could be the pretty little letters of behind their name. That'll be fine. But exactly who are these people? What do they know? And how experienced are they? Because if they know what they're talking about, then they should probably have some knowledge to be able to speak. So check that out and see what's going on there. If they're an expert, they'll know their stuff. So one way to really look about this, here's an example. I had this student who was looking at illegal immigration, but he was a business person. He was looking in to the financial impact of illegal immigration through our southern border. So what he wanted to do was see exactly what is happening, and found out that this is like a $1 billion thing every single year. It is like $97 billion are coming into the United States every single year because of illegal immigration. And this has to do with taxes and a whole bunch of other things. So in his argumentative research paper, he needed a source that is going to like give him like what are the top few ideas that he needed to talk about. So I use this one as an example. So this graphic here, if you look at it, I kind of take this gray part, I just kind of shadowed that because that's the first section of the written part. And then at the bottom of the graphic, I give you the citation stuff. So I have here Brian W. Roberts is a research economist formerly employed by the Department of Homeland Security. The analysis and opinions provided in this article are the author's alone and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Homeland Security or any other organization or individual. And then it continues there. But what this does is an example of how this author has expertise. So he's a research economist, so he knows the economy. He's a researcher, but he also has experience working in the Department of Homeland Security. So he's kind of a twofer. He has experience and expertise in this field. He knows what he's talking about. The other part is often will find in research where you find like the one source that kind of centers the whole project. And for that student, this was it. It gave like the top 10 major concepts that were like the major ideas for research in this area. And he talked about the top 5. So he didn't have to come up with those ideas himself. He used this source, and then that centered everything. And then he was able to find other sources that talked about those ideas, and it supplemented everything. So finding an expert or experts in the field that you want to talk about, that's really important. You don't just get some Joe Blow off the street. You want to get the people who know what they're talking about, because the best research gives you the best information, right? I'm just saying, you can't just get anybody. So the reputable sources gives you the reputable like papers. That's where you're looking for. So our sources also need to be intended for an academic audience who prefer peer-reviewed sources. So what is peer-reviewed? So here's an example, the Chronicle of Higher Education. So this is a journal. It's highly prestigious for higher education circles. If I were to get an article published in the Chronicle, would be like, oh, I've made it. So peer-reviewed means that, say I write an article and I submit it to the Chronicle, what they will do is see first, have you written it appropriately, the appropriate format, all that kind of stuff. If I pass all of that review, they are going to send my article to a number of other experts in that field. So I'm an English person. They will send this to, say, 10 or 12 other English experts that know and have expertise in this area, and they're going to read it and analyze it. They're going to tear it apart to make sure that I know what I'm talking about, that it's well written, it's well researched, that I don't have any grammar errors, all of those kind of things. They are going to make sure that it is worthy of publication. That is peer reviewed. They are literally reviewing it. And as a collective, they will determine whether or not it should be published. And if not, I don't get published. If it is, then they will make their recommendations to the Chronicle, and the Chronicle will follow through. I've been on a review committee before for publication, and it is serious stuff. So kind of cool. I've also helped somebody, a former colleague at the college where I used to teach, and he was on this. He's an environmental scientist, environmental engineer, and he worked with several other environmental scientists across the world on this huge project. I didn't completely understand the science involved. He had to explain a couple things, but he worked on this thing and they couldn't get it published. He asked me to look at it, and there were only 2 areas where I didn't understand what was going on. He had to clarify one process for me, and then I just clarified a couple language issues for him because it was kind of like awkwardly worded. Once we did that, it got published. And the reason was because it was just a little bit wonky in some of the wording and just needed to be fixed for a wider audience. That's all it was. So that's how peer review works. It needs to be for an academic audience. So something that gets peer reviewed. What this does is make sure that the writing is at the appropriate level. That's where we're looking for. So reliable information that can be corroborated, investigated, validated. That's the type of reputable source that we're looking for. So again, not just some Joe Blow off the street that kind of has a blog and thinks he knows what he's talking about or looking for good stuff, right? So one of the ways that we can do that is into our databases. EBSCOhost is one of our really good databases. There are other ways to find information as well, and we'll be able to talk about that as we move forward. So we'll look at a whole bunch of ways to find information. And, we're not just Googling it, okay? Because Google has some problems. You're going to get billions of hits and all that kind of stuff. So we'll talk about how to do that because we're looking for academic, scholarly sources. We'll also look for things that are balanced, fair, reasonable, and well written. And that could be news articles. So one example is NPR. So this stands for National Public Radio. Now, depending on, political spectrum and all that kind of stuff, this is just an example. Usually NPR has well-written articles. If they screw up and they miss something, they usually acknowledge that, which is actually appropriate. I teach mass communication, reporting, all of those kind of stuff. So that's something that is also very standard. Um, Associated Press, all the Pew Research, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I teach that kind of standards for journalism. So those kind of things, when we're looking at current events, this is something that's going to be really important, but also in research. This is also a Comp 2 class. So some of the things that we find might be over our heads. That's okay because we're in Comp 2 and sometimes things are a little bit above our level. So if we're having problems when we get into, especially our argumentative papers, where it's just like, okay, this is, I'm no, it's too technical, it's too much, I'm not getting this stuff, then we can work together and find something that's a little bit, on our level where we need to be. So we'll talk about that too. Now, what about disreputable stuff? Because there's a whole bunch of stuff that we don't need to be looking at. So sources to avoid. Websites. There's a lot of websites with deliberate bias. Now, okay, I don't know if you've ever seen Daily Beast. I kind of like Daily Beast just as entertainment value because usually this stuff is really well written. And I like to compare and contrast some stuff. I study media, so I look at this stuff all the time. Pretty well written. And one of the things that this actually does is, it influences people. So I look at it and kind of see what's going on. But I also look at other websites on the other side of the spectrum for politics and other media stuff. So kind of look at that. But as a source for research, I'm not going to be using it because it's going to have that deliberate bias. So for our comparative analysis, though, that might be one of the websites we use. Could be something that would be leading to some conversation. Anything that ends in .com probably has some bias, but we could also see .org and .edu sometimes, and a whole bunch of others, especially now with our kind of socio-political conversations that are happening. Out-of-date broken sites. Obviously, that's something to avoid. Social networks. Social media is where most of us get our news. If you didn't know that, now you do. And there's bias all over it. So something to be aware of. Wikipedia. Now, we always kind of look at why is Wikipedia not something that we use in academics? And the main thing is because we can change it. So this is something to really be aware of. I actually did this as a graduate teaching assistant. I was teaching Comp 2, that was part of my duties. I was teaching Comp 2 and I was commiserating with one of my colleagues. His name is Tracy, and we're like, oh my gosh, my students keep using Wikipedia. I know, mine too. And how can we get them to stop? We keep telling them not to do it. Why aren't they doing it? Like, why aren't they following along? And yeah, we were real cute. So we came up with this plan, right? So, okay, what we're gonna do is a scavenger hunt. We're gonna have them find a whole bunch of really cool stuff. We're gonna library and all that. We didn't come up with it ourselves. We had to do something like this in grad school. But what we did, we came up with this plan for one of the questions. We came up with finding this prehistoric kind of elephant. I can't remember what it was for the life of me. It's been a long time. But we found that the babies, we change it so where their babies, when they were born, that they were pink and they were cute and fuzzy. And they weren't, but we made it to where they were, and we cited ourselves. We made up a citation. So T. Riley and S. Piper, Eastern New Mexico University of that year. That's where we were, and it was that year. And we just thought, okay, this isn't ever going to work. They're going to totally figure this out. So we made it so obvious, right? I come in the next day of class when the assignment was due. They had a couple days, right? And to a conversation of students. How cute would that be? I so wish I could see those elephants. Oh my gosh, those babies. They'd be so cute and pink and fuzzy. What? Guys, when I'm telling you I was floored, oh my gosh. I had to pay Tracy $10 because he just knew it would work. And I just like, no, there's no way. I lost $10. So it was a good teaching moment for all of us. I can't remember what the elephant was because we changed it back because, we relied. But Wikipedia can be changed. Now, there is some use for Wikipedia, to get ideas. And I do believe that most of the information is really true. I use Wikipedia just to look stuff up and because it's cool, right? But in academic circles, it's not usable. And here's the main reason why. Because there are a lot of websites who will just copy and paste information from Wikipedia and then use it as their own. Total plagiarism site. Like it is a thing. So we don't use it. That doesn't mean that you can't find some sources on Wikipedia and then go to those sources. Just put it out there. Now, when it comes to your own writing, here's the thing. It may be unintended. But when you use hurtful language and prejudiced language towards others in your writing, you got some issues. This could go into legal ramifications. This could go into like some major stuff. This could get you fired. There are some words that should never be used. Some words you shouldn't use anyway. But some words, especially in the workplace, let alone in research, there are some connotations that don't need to be used because it has deliberate bias. And we've got to be careful. We need to be aware of our own bias, but this will allow us to kind of think about those things. But we've got to be really careful even about our unintended bias. So kind of a little bit of soul searching. I'm not saying to try to change who you are or anything like that, but let's be aware of our own bias so that we're not unintentionally or intentionally trying to insult a people. So sometimes the bias is obvious, sometimes it's a little bit more subtle, but especially in the workplace, you got to be careful. Gender bias is very real. If you've ever heard of a glass ceiling, this is very real. Look up the Lilly Ledbetter Act, for instance. That is very real. Racial bias in, for example, in real estate. That is very real. Of course, we've seen racism throughout the nation, throughout the world, and we know we have a history of that in our country. In the housing market, it has been redlining has been throughout this nation, and it is returning. So we see this happen. We've got to be careful. So when we look at it in research, that's something that we've got to really pay attention to. We don't want to be the ones doing it. So it's inaccurate and it's unfair. So, for instance, and these are kind of just a little bit goofy, but saying all people from Oklahoma listen to country music. Can we really say that? Because I can tell you, I've got a lot of students from Oklahoma. They don't all like country music. Just putting it out there. The people in Russia think Americans are stupid. Well, this sentence implies that all people in Russia, saying the people in Russia, that all people in Russia think Americans are stupid. No, maybe some do, but you can't say all of them do. I used to work with people from Russia in my previous institution, and actually they thought we were pretty cool. So put it out there. Those who can do, those who can't teach. I've heard this a lot. I'm a teacher. If you know any teachers, they've probably heard this. It's pretty insulting to teachers, especially since those who can and actually do, they've had teachers who taught them how to do. Here's the thing. Biased language shows poorly on you as a writer. When you use biased language, it shows that you don't write well. So we wouldn't want to use it. It's not the person or the group that it reflects poorly on. It is you. So using that language shows that you are treating that person or persons, that group, with disrespect that they haven't earned. And it labels those people inappropriately. It shows that you don't understand the appropriate language. And that's where, you're having some issues. So when you know better, you do better. That's the thing. So here's a list of some fact-checking links. And these are ones that I have used really well over the years, and they work really well even today. So factcheck.org, this is from the Annenberg Public Policy Center. It works really good for political claims, and it is updated all the time. They work really fast. So political debates, all that kind of stuff, it works really, really well. Fact News Checker, fake news sources, for instance, we see fake news, that term bandied about all the time. Snopes, this is really good for like debunking kind of stuff, especially when it comes to like urban legends and all that kind of stuff. Super, super fun stuff. Hoaxslayer, it's another kind of one. It's a little bit lighter kind of stuff than Snopes. Snopes will go really in depth and stuff. This one does like email hoaxes, identity theft kind of stuff. SciCheck, really into scientific claims, false claims, sometimes medical research, sometimes, especially when it gets into partisan public policy stuff. PolitiFact is really good. Pulitzer winning. This is, especially when it comes to reporting, PolitiFact is super, super good. Allsides.com is the site that we're going to use to get our 3 articles for our project. So this is one that I highly respect. I use it frequently, especially for anything that has to do with current events, because it's going to give you 3 different articles. It's called a roundup. Super cool stuff. Open Secrets is nonpartisan. It's independent and nonprofit. So there's not like a stake in the game here. So I like that, because it tracks a lot of US politics. especially when it comes to elections and public policy. LinkedIn is a networking site. So if you haven't heard of LinkedIn, that's a really kind of a neat one. There's a couple others that are pretty good, but I like LinkedIn because it's so well known. Washington Post fact checker, it is more right leaning, but it does a really good job of fact checking from all political sides. So on huge topics. So it's not just about politics, but it does a lot of really good fact checking. So it doesn't. Even though it's right leaning, it does more moderate fact checking. So that's pretty cool, especially when it goes in depth and cross references what it's going to fact check. So I really like that. So I know that this has been like a really long video, but I wanted to go in depth into all of this. So take the time to go through it. You want to take good notes on this if you haven't. And if you have any questions about any of the material, please let me know. Be sure to contact me and any questions at all. So you can contact me by text message, phone call, we can Zoom, we can do all of the things, whatever you need. So let me know. And thank you for spending your time with me. I appreciate you guys. Um, Let me know if you have questions, and we'll do all the things. I'll try to not have such long videos in the future. So have a great day. Thanks again. We'll keep moving on. Thank you so much. Bye, guys.